Okay, hello. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'll share a little bit about myself before we get started. My name is Mara Walsh and I am your host for this evening. I am joining you from the United States, specifically between Philadelphia and New York. I started leading tours with EF Tours as a Girl Scout leader, taking girls and their families to international destinations every summer. I have since expanded my physical travel program and added adult-only tours as well as family-friendly tours. In nearly all of my tours, I partner with EF Tours or their adult division, Go Ahead Tours. There's also a couple reasons I expanded this travel program into a virtual tour series. One, I really wanted to support the tour director community during this time of travel restrictions where they have no work. And two, I really wanted to keep the excitement of travel alive for my group and extend the opportunity to those of you who have learned about our tours through your friends, your family, social media, and other means. So welcome. We've done several tours in the past months since COVID has struck. If you've missed any of them and you want to go back, we have them all recorded and available at girltraveltours.com/virtual-tours. They are also available on YouTube. There's a YouTube channel. And if you're viewing them from a television, an iPad, or an iPhone, we have found that YouTube is a better way to see the recordings rather than looking at them straight from the website. We have several more tours coming up. We have one more in the year of 2020. That's the Canadian Rockies. I'm actually going to share a screen so that you can see all of the tours, and then that way you can understand what I'm going to say, and maybe the visual connection will help you remember some of these and get you to schedule for some in the future. We have several scheduled for 2021, including Gaudi's Barcelona, Amsterdam, Florence and Tuscany, World War II and the Western Front, Scandinavia, Notable Women of Santa Fe, Mystery on the Orient Express, Northern Ireland and the Troubles, Iceland, and so much more. We are always scheduling so that we have more and more coming. As long as you're interested in viewing these virtual tour presentations, we will continue to produce them. I will say that the model of these virtual tour presentations is educational in nature because that's the way that we travel. Our physical tours that we do with groups are educational tours. So it was only natural for us to convert that into a virtual tour experience. You can register for future tours at our website by clicking through any of the tours. That will take you to a Zoom registration, just like you did for today's tour, and you could sign up for as many as you need. I will tell you that you have to sign up individually for each one. So if you want to attend 5, you have to sign up for each one individually. Before we get started, I just want to tell you there are a few ways that you can interact with us during this presentation. If you're on Zoom and you've joined us, there's a Q&A link in the Zoom toolbar. Those should be questions that you want to pose for the tour director so that she addresses them after the tour. If you want to coerce with me during the tour and you want to give me some information or just shout out something, the chat feature is good for that, but we will not be addressing those questions live after the tour. So those are the two ways you can address us in the Zoom presentation. On Facebook, we are live on Facebook right now as well. And you can add to the comments at any time. I'm going to be monitoring both Facebook and Zoom so that we can get some feedback from both of those streaming avenues. We also have a chat feature, as I talked about. Feel free to drop where you're coming in from. And also on Facebook, you could give us a shout out from your location. It's always nice to see how many people from around the globe are joining us. And then there's one other way that I like to interact with our folks that are on Zoom, and that's with a poll. So I'm going to launch this poll, and essentially it's just a very simple poll. What is your connection to Berlin? I've been and love it. I have a trip planned. I plan to go in the future. I may be interested to go in the future. We shall see. Or I'm solely interested in experiencing it virtually. I'm going to give you a second to round out those to give us your feedback on that poll. And I'm going to end the poll. It looks like we have more than half of the audience that's come in. And it looks like that so many of us are interested in traveling to Berlin in the future. Not a bad percentage have been and loved it. 28% have been to Berlin. So that gives us a good understanding of everybody and where they're coming from. And we have a good 15% of people who are here for just to experience it virtually. And we welcome you this week and every week as we go forward. I'm going to stop sharing the poll so that you don't see that in front of your monitor. And if you do, you could just X out at the top left. There's like a little red button. You could just click that and it'll take you out of the poll. So I want to get back to our tour. A tour would not be complete without a fantastic tour director. A tour director is like a personal travel concierge who stays with the group from start to finish. They meet us at the airport, they're with us every minute along the way, and then they take us to the airport at the end. They are a wonderful asset. They share a world of knowledge. They manage all of our travel plans and make sure our experience is stressless and full of positive experiences, allowing us to make lifelong memories. They take all the work out of it and give us all the fun, which is awesome. These are by far the most important people in a group tour. And if we're not traveling right now, you can imagine that our tour directors are not working. Many of them have not worked since last winter, and some even before that, because it is very seasonal in nature. So I will let you know that after the tour, if you would like to tip the tour director, by all means, it is discretionary and optional, but it is very much appreciated. I will share in the chat ways for you to tip if you are so inclined. I'm hoping that this virtual tour will not only reignite our desire to travel, but also allow a tour director to do what she does best, which is share her knowledge and passion for travel. But before I hand over this event to our tour director, I know that many of you found us on Facebook and many of you are streaming this live on Facebook right now. I just want to send out a huge shout out and warn people about the relentless scammers on Facebook who are trying to promote fake pages and events by copying legitimate events like this one and providing alternative links to sites where you need to provide a credit card to enter. Please do not give a credit card to enter an event that is supposed to be free. My virtual tour presentations do not require credit cards to join. If you see links to stream in the comments, please do not click on them. They are baiting you so that you would give credit cards, okay? So please, if you would like to safely access my events and you're on Facebook right now, you know that you can always go to my website, girltraveltours.com, and you could sign up through Zoom, which is a much safer way to join our tours. So back to our virtual tour. Today, we are lucky to have a tour director who loves the city of Berlin and has adopted it as her own. I'm honored to introduce you to and hand over this event to our amazing tour director and my new friend from Berlin, Silvia Sarsano. Silvia, you may take control, you may come in and you can share your screen with us and you can
see me
on your presentation. You're good and I can see you fine.
Perfect. Okay, now I'm gonna, again, welcome to Berlin, everybody. My name is Silvia. I'm your tour director for this trip. And while opening the presentation, I'm gonna tell you that as Mara told, I've been adopted by the city. I'm originally from Italy, from Rome, and I've been living now in Berlin since 14 years, which is a long time. The reason why I feel a strong connection to Berlin is not only because I live here since 13 years, but when I was a child, my very first historical memory was the fall of the Berlin Wall. I remember I watched it in television, and since that moment, I felt this curiosity about the history of Berlin that grew through the time. Already when I was 13, I told my mom, I'm gonna move to Berlin one day. And when I was 26, I finally did it. So Berlin is not the city that you expect. I have to warn you about that. The beauty of Berlin is not the typical beauty you will find in Paris, for example, or in London. It's a different beauty. There is a lot of mixed architecture between old and new. A lot have been destroyed by the Second World War and during the time of the of East and West Germany during the division time. So it's not super pretty in some cases. It kind of have its own weirdness, but it's a city that recover all of that, of all this lack of beauty of the big building than other cities have. It recover it fully in the energy. Berlin is a very young city. The average age is 42 years old. Is a cultural city. You find plenty of theater, art exhibition, concert, of course, not in time of Corona. There is every year the very famous Berlinale Film Festival, plenty of events, and there is an extremely lust of life. Berlin, the people from Berlin themselves, they say Berlin is not Germany. And this is not necessarily a better things or good things, it's just different. It's very vibrant. And everybody who has been in Berlin for one reason or the other fell in love with the city. So as you see here, Berlin poor but sexy. This is how it was named Berlin until more or less 10 years ago. It's not that poor anymore, but it's still sexy. So let's go and find out. Okay, so here we are. That's the general information. Berlin has got, is a pretty widespread and big city. It's one of the biggest in Europe. The city population is 3.7 million inhabitants. 20% of them are foreigner, and I count myself as one of them. 35% has got a migration background. The biggest community of people living in Berlin but coming from elsewhere is the Turkish community. So if you ever heard of the kebab, for example, the kebab is a Turkish invention, but from the Turkish people who were living in Berlin. As I told you before, is poor but sexy, 10% of unemployment quote. That's why it's been poor for a long time. The metropolitan area is even bigger. It comes up to 6 million inhabitants. I know compared to many other cities in the world, mine seems not that big, but for us, it's pretty big. There are two rivers in Berlin that goes through the city. One is the Havel and one is the Spree. The Spree goes through the city center and is probably the one that if you have been in Berlin or if you plan to do, is the one you're gonna see. And it's also the one where you can have a beautiful boat trip and enjoy the city from the river. So before we go further into the tour, just to make you understanding, this is a little bit of a view of what we're gonna see. We're gonna start from this side, from the left side of the screen. There is the Parliament building there. And then we're gonna move to the center where there is this big road. Here there is the Brandenburger Gate, the famous Brandenburger Gate. From the moment we step beyond the Brandenburger Gate, we are officially in the former East Berlin. Of course, the wall is not there anymore, but so that you have an idea and an understanding where all the monuments are. And we're gonna keep walking through this main road until we arrive to Alexanderplatz, where you see the big TV tower. So I choose this tour. This is called the Historical Berlin. I choose this tour so you have also the possibility, if you come to Berlin, to do the same path only by walking. It's not really that far, and it's a big amount of monuments that you have the possibility to see through this virtual walking tour. Okay, just to give you a little bit of context, Berlin has been the capital of Prussia. Prussia was a Germanic kingdom and a state that existed from the 1200 until officially 1947. It was when Prussia was abolished, but in the meanwhile, Prussia had become Germany. Prussia became the leading country of a confederation that wanted to unite Germany under one kingdom, one empire. And they made it so through alliances and through some war. The three most important wars were the so-called Independence War. The first one was in 1864 against Denmark. Then there was the one in 1866 against Austria, and then in 1817 against France. So in 1871, the German Empire was formed with Berlin capital. The ruling dynasty of Prussia for 500 years was the House of Hohenzollern. The Hohenzollern were a family that was coming actually from the south part of this map that you see here. If you see in the lower part, this little green area, this is where they come from. It's an area called Swabia. They were divided in two branches. The Franconian branch was the one who became the dynasty who ruled Berlin for so long, from 1415 till 1918. Going further, again, it takes a little while. You have to bear with me. Okay, this is a few of the members of the Hohenzollern family, some of the most famous. They've been elector, they've been princes, they've been king, and they've been emperor. It's a bit tricky to remember them all because most of them were called either Friedrich or Frederick William or William, and mostly was the number one or the number two. The most famous one was Friedrich II. This man here was so-called Friedrich the Great, or the Old Fritz. And he was a very illuminated king. He did a lot for Berlin and for Prussia. And he was somebody who supported a lot art and culture. So that's why he became very famous. Berlin has been the capital city of many things. The first capital was the capital of Margraviate of Brandenburg. Then it became the capital of the Kingdom of Prussia. And then again, the capital of the German Empire. It was the capital of the Weimar Republic, the First Republic. Then it became the capital of the very famous Third Reich, which is when Hitler raised to the power. Then the capital de facto of the German Democratic Republic is Germany or GDR. And then when Germany was reunited again from 1991 is again the capital of the city. But before was all that, it was only very simply a swamp. This is what Berlin was. The first people who came here were Slavic population. Around the year 1180, there were two small settlements on both sides of the river Spree. And these two settlements were called Köln and Berlin. The name Berlin comes actually from the fact that it was a swamp, because in Old Slavic language, swamp means berlo, the Slavic name was berlo, and there was an assonance with bear, and the bear became the symbol of Berlin in 79 officially. This is the flag and the coat of arms of Berlin. The most famous bear of Berlin is not the one on the flag. It was this one. It was called KNUT. It was born in 2006 in the zoo of Berlin. And his story was very sweet. He was rejected by his mother and he was raised by the zookeeper. So it's a sort of Tarzan story, but reversed. He became the symbol of Berlin. The whole world went crazy for him because he was the only Kurd who was born in captivity and survived past the infancy. He actually died at only the age of 4, and his remains now are in the History Museum. It's a natural history museum. It's a bit creepy actually, but it was very sweet and was very beloved. When he died, there were articles everywhere about him. So to the next slide. This is the first mention of the settlement of Köln, in 1237 was mentioned for the first time, and Berlin was mentioned just a couple of years after, in 1244. The two cities started basically co-working together immediately. In 1307, they were already formed a union and they merged completely around 100 years after. The smallest part that you see on this map was Köln, and the biggest part was Berlin. At one point, they decided to use only the name Berlin because it was the bigger one and kept going bigger and bigger. This is how it was at the time that was mentioned. This is just to show you how much the city population increased between 1400 and 1800, of about from 8,500 inhabitants 170,000 inhabitants. This is how Berlin looked like in 1780. And was already with 170,000 inhabitants. With the industrialization, the number became bigger and bigger. So before 1920, this red sign that you see on this left map was Berlin. It was already 1.9 million inhabitants. In 1920, they made this law called the Great Berliner Act, and the city population increased to 3.8 million inhabitants. And this is exactly how Berlin looks today. Unfortunately, what happened after the Second World War arrived, and as you can see from these images, the city population dropped very dramatically. Okay. So it dropped to 2.8 million inhabitants. Most of the city center was heavily damaged, partly destroyed. But just to give you an idea of how much the Berliner wanted to live during the bombing, and Berlin has been bombed by the Americans, by the Russians, by the French, by the British, by everybody. During the bombing, they would still keep the theater and the cabaret open, and people would still go out and try to enjoy life because they thought, we don't know how much we are gonna live. So during the Cold War, after the Second World War, Berlin was divided in 4 different sectors. There was the United Kingdom sector, the United States of America sector, and the French sector. And on the other side, there was the Soviet one. Now, the first 3 would get along. The 4th one had some kind of problem. The government of East Berlin was putting a lot of pressure on the citizens, and the citizens started fleeing. And this is where in 1861, they decided to build the infamous Berlin Wall. Now, the Berlin Wall, a lot of people don't really understand how it was structured. It would basically encompass West Berlin. So East Berlin didn't have a wall around itself, but West Berlin did, which was kind of ironical because West Berlin was actually much more free. There was much more freedom there. So just to make you understand even better. So this is how the map of West Germany and East Germany look like. Sorry, I have to go back. This is the map. So West Germany, West Berlin was inside East Germany, surrounded by the wall. It was like an island. But the people from West Berlin were allowed to travel through East Germany to go to West Germany and everywhere else, while the people from East Berlin could travel only inside East Germany and the countries of under the Soviet Union influence. How did the wall look like? The wall was actually 2 walls. There was one outside and one inside. And in the middle, there was the death strip. And the death strip was patrolled by border guards and dogs, and there were the order of shooting to kill everybody who would try to escape through the wall. This is how the wall looked at the very beginning. They remade it bigger and stronger after a few years, but the very beginning was just a tiny wall with some wire. And this is what happened when the real wall was built up. In the west side of the city, close to the wall, you would see this poster that say you're leaving the American sector or you're leaving the French sector. And they would build this kind of platform. Now this platform, they were existing only in West Berlin. And people from West Berlin could overlook on the wall and see our lives look like on the other side. The people from East Berlin were not really happy about that because they felt a little bit like animals in a zoo, but there was another possibility to use this platform. So some of the people could have waved to their parents from the other side of the city because they were not allowed to see each other really. Now going past, now we start our real walking tour. This is just a general map of the area, and I made another one that gives you more of every stop we're gonna make. We're gonna start by the Reichstag. It's the parliament building, it's the yellow one that you see here. Okay, so this is the parliament building. The story of this building is incredible. It goes really from gloomy to glamorous. It was supposed to be a present from the first emperor of Germany to the German people. He didn't want to make this present at all because he was afraid that having a parliament would overshadow his power. But it took a while to convince, and at the end, in 1884, he approved this project from Sir Paul Wallot, which took 10 years to build. This project was inspired by the Philadelphia Memorial Hall. It was heavily criticized. The emperor called it the monkey house. He really didn't like it, but because it was a mix of neoclassical and neo-baroque architecture, very heavy dome, but for some reason they made it at the end. And 16 years, no, more than 20 years later, in 1916, the emperor even decided to put this writing on top of the building, which means the Deutschen Völker means to the German people. It's still there, the writing. This is how the parliament looked like in the olden days at the very beginning, with this beautiful square in front. And in front of the building, there was the victory column, the so-called Siegessäule. Now, there is an interesting story about this column. She's been translocated in another place of the city because under Hitler, there was this plan to completely redo the city of Berlin in the so-called capital of the world, Germania. So they moved that because they had to build a street. Fortunately, it didn't happen, but the victory column is now in another place. You can see it here. This is on top of it, there is this wonderful golden angel, which the people from Berlin called the Golden Else, because at the time that it was built, there was this very famous novel called Golden Else. And so they give the same name to the angel. This is how the column looked like. They made it even bigger once they replaced it in another square, because this was the square, it was very big, so they needed a higher column. And it was made to celebrate the 3 independence war that Germany went through in order to become the German Empire. So if you see in this third picture, and I don't know if you can see my mouse, but on the upper part on the left, that's the parliament. And so this is how far was translated the column. And if you go straight to the Brandenburger Gate, if you want to see how Berlin looked like during the time of the wall and the division, you absolutely have to watch this movie, which is called Wings of Desire by Wim Wenders. It was made in 1987 and is a masterpiece. There was a remake that was made in America in 97, I think. It was called The City of Angels with Meg Ryan and Nicolas Cage, I think. I probably have, saw it probably when I was a child as well. But the original one is really a masterpiece. So if somebody loves cinema, this is the movie to watch if you want to really have the impression of Berlin during the war. So another reason why the Victory Column is very famous is because of the Love Parade. The Love Parade was a techno parade, a techno festival, who started in 1989 with only 150 people and went on until 2006 every year. It was a wild party. It was a celebration of love, tolerance, and freedom. And they're not doing it anymore for security reason, but it was very representative of Berlin in the 90s. Because as I told you before, also about the fact that the people from Berlin wanted to have a good life, even during the war. So it was after the fall of the Berlin Wall. So Berlin is like a phoenix. It's always able to reborn from its own ashes. But now, talking about ashes, we go straight back to the story of the parliament, because we're not finished there. In 1933, there was a huge fire, and this huge fire happened only 4 weeks after Hitler was elected as chancellor. At the time, they found an anarchist from Netherlands guilty of that. Many study afterward, they realized that it probably wasn't him. They were the Nazi themselves, because this fire permitted Hitler to put on action a few emergency decrees and the Enabling Act, which basically made him able to have all the plenary power. They didn't need the parliament anymore. So that's why it became a dictatorship, thanks to this fire. From the moment of the fire, the parliament has not been used as a parliament anymore until the reunification of Berlin, of Germany. The member of the parliament under Hitler, which was not really a parliament, more the member of the party, would meet themselves in the Opera Kroll, which was a building in front of that doesn't exist anymore. And after this fire, this parliament just stood left there, but it was still a very important symbol of power. So when Berlin was liberated, the last days were called the Battle of Berlin. The parliament was heavily bombed. The Russian soldiers were the one who liberated Berlin. There is this very famous photo of a Russian soldier putting the flag on the parliament building. If you see on the picture, this little man down, he's got 2 watches, not because he was special or because he was rich, because yes, they liberated Berlin, but they committed also a awful lot of crimes by stealing and some brutality around the city as well, because nobody's perfect. This is again a picture of the parliament after the war. And this is what happened after the Second World War. So they decided to renovate the building, even if they couldn't use it because the parliament building was in West Berlin. And West Berlin moved its capital city, West Germany moved its capital from Berlin to Bonn, which is a tiny city in the center of Germany. And East Berlin stayed the capital, but they couldn't use it because it was in the West. So they decided to renovate it with this project of Hohlbaumkarten. He took away all the ornaments and left basically just the outside intact. The inside was completely dismantled and was used for an exhibition. In 1991, when Germany was, after the reunification in 1991, Berlin became again the capital of the city. And they decided to make a new renovation of the building. They wanted to bring back the parliament there. And before it happens, something specific happened to the building, and it's these things. I don't know if you ever heard of them, but there was this artist duo, Christo and Jean-Claude, who were worked together, who were a couple, and they were famous for wrapping landmarks with fabric. They never asked for any money for that. They always used their own money through selling other artworks of them. And they basically did it because they wanted to bring joy, to bring a different point of view to something familiar. They had this very specific, site-specific artwork, and there were 2 million people in 2 weeks, no, 5 million people in 2 weeks coming to see the Reichstag. If we all have the chance next year to travel to Paris, in Paris you will see the Arc de Triomphe wrapped. Even if Christo died last year and Jean-Claude in 2009, they decided to bring forth these artworks of there. So in 1999, finally, the new parliament was ready, and this is the new parliament building. It was made by Sir Norman Foster. It's a masterpiece of engineering. Today, the Reichstag produced 80% of the energy that it used from themselves. This is the plenary hall, which is just under the dome. So it receives natural light from this system of mirror. And there is also the air get renovated and exchanged. So when the member of the parliament have to deliver a new law, they have a fresh mind and then they don't go crazy. This is again another picture of the dome from on top. You have to book your slot to go there. The reason why it's transparent is because Germany lives with this heavy past of them, and they don't want to make the same mistake. They really live with this huge burden of what they did during the Second World War and during the division. So the transparency is for the democracy. They want to show that they are transparent now. And you can literally see the member of the parliament working while you are on top. Another thing that they did during renovation, they wanted to keep some historical traces. So there were a lot of graffiti left by the Russian soldier, and they kept it just, so it's very interesting sometimes when you go in the building, you see these old dates, like for example, in this picture, we have the 20th of May, 45. They canceled only the graffiti that were either sexist or racist. Another things that they did, they asked a lot of contemporary artists to create works inside the parliament building and in the neighbor building of the government district. The most interesting one that you could see is this one, is the archive of the German members of the parliament. Basically, it was made by Christian Boltanski, which is a Polish-French artist. He basically created this archive with box. They all look alike to underline the equality of the members of the parliament. On each box, there is the name, the dates where when he was working as a member of the parliament, and the parliament he belonged to, the party he belonged to. Some of them, if you see in this picture, they have a black tag. These are the only one who have the black tag, are the member of the parliament who were murdered under National Socialism. So you may recognize some names in this huge archive of 5,000 names. For example, Angela Merkel. I don't know if you ever heard of her. This is, maybe you can recognize her when she was younger, or when she was a little bit older, or how is she today? So she's considered to be the most powerful woman in the world. For us in Germany, it's just called Mutti, which means mama. Mama is very upset lately because of the number of corona growing, and she decided that from tomorrow, we're gonna be in hard lockdown until at least the 10th of January. So it's gonna be a pretty lonely Christmas for me, but she's doing a great job. We all appreciate her here now. Another name that you will find, and this is the shock of this work, is the one of Adolf Hitler. This box has been vandalized because people were upset to see his name there. But Christian Boltanski put it there just to show that he was democratically elected like anybody else. So this is the controversy of this work. Contemporary artists been fitted everywhere in Berlin. That's for me that I love art. That's why I like to be here. This is the government district. The building number 1 is the parliament. Then there is the Marie Elisabeth Luders Haus and the Paul Lobe Haus, which is the library and the offices of the member of the parliament. They form a sort of ribbon, federal ribbon is called, and is a bridge that symbolically connect West Berlin with East Berlin, former West and East Berlin. And the third office is the Chancellery, also called the washing machine because it looks like a washing machine. And this is where Angela Merkel works. Outside of the parliament, we find the first memorial of this area. It's plenty of memorial around the parliament. This one is to the murdered members of the parliament, are 96 stones with their name on it. Now we're moving from the Reichstag, going toward the Brandenburger Gate, but before we go there, we skip to 3 different memorials. They are all dedicated to the victim of the concentration camp. There are 3 different, and they are all incredible and very beloved by the tourists. The first one is the memorial to the Sinti and Roma, victim of National Socialism. Then we go to the memorial of the murdered Jews of Europe, and then to the one of the homosexual persecuted under Nazism. The first one is the less known, personally my favorite because of its aesthetic, and it's hidden in the Tiergarten between the parliament and the Brandenburger Gate. It's the one to the Sinti and Roma. It was made by Dani Karavan in 2012, and is made by this pit with black, so it looks very deep and reflects the sky. And around this pool, there is a poem, which is this poem here by the Italian Roma Santino Spinelli, which say, sunken in face, extinguished eyes, cold lips, silence, a torn heart, without breath, without words, no tears. All around in this area, there is a violin tone sound installation, which is called Mare Manuscenghe, means our people, by Romeo Franz. So you have all the time this little sound going on. And all around the pit, you will find these stones with the name of the concentration camp. but the sweetest part of this monument is that there is in the center of the pool, there is this triangle. The triangle was the form that was put on the inmate uniform to recognize them in the concentration camp. The one of the Roma was brown, for example. The one of the homosexual was pink, and so on. Every day at 12, this triangle disappears under the water, and every day comes up with a new flower. And this is going to be in perpetuity. So this is the first one. The second one is the most famous and the most visited of everyone. Is the Memorial to the Murdered Jews of Europe. It's also the first that was made by Peter Eisenmann. This photo that you see here, I made it myself from a building nearby around 5 years ago on a very cold, snowy day. And it's a very impressive monument. There are 2,711 concrete pillars. The reason why Peter Eisenmann didn't want to give a very specific explanation about the moment, but he wanted to give the idea, like basically the thematic is that in the olden time when somebody was dead, you could put a stone and have a memorial of that person. But in the time of mass killing, one stone is not enough. And these stones are so strong, they want to basically give you the idea of this closed system with irrational structure that lose humanity, lose the human touch. And it's a monument that you don't understand through time, if ever something like the Holocaust can be understood, but you understand it through space because it's really huge. There are this road that goes deep and up and in different width. So it's kind of it's a very strong impact going into this labyrinth. This is another picture from above. And this is from the inside, and there is also an information center where there are more or less 500,000 visitors every year. So the last memorial that we find is the one for the homosexual persecuted under National Socialism. It was made by this duo from Denmark, Michel Elgrem and Ingar Dragset. The way they work is that they build something inspired by the surrounding. And in this case, the surrounding was the monument in front to the Jewish Holocaust. So they made a similar pillar, but is a less static pillar. There is a video inside that you can see from the window with 2 men or 2 women. There have been 3 videos during these years, kissing and hugging themselves. Homosexuality became a criminal felony in 1935, and it was eliminated in 1969. So now we move further to the most important and most famous landmark of Berlin, which is the Brandenburger Gate and Pariser Platz. Platz in German means square. So when you hear me say Platz, is always square. Paris Square. Paris Square was actually laid down in 1732 as an exercise and parade ground with military purposes. It was formerly called just Viereck or Carré, which means square. But in 1814 was renamed Pariser Platz in honor of the Prussian who had taken Paris in a war. The Brandenburger Gate was formerly known as the Peace Gate. Now it's Brandenburger Gate because it goes in direction Brandenburg. You can see how big it is. It's got 2 rows of Doric column, and it was inspired by the Propylaea. The Propylaea is the entrance gate of the Acropolis of Aachen. On top of the Brandenburger Gate, there is the Quadriga, which was made by the artist Johann Gottfried Schadow. This German name are always a bit tricky to pronounce, in 1793. The Quadriga had herself a lot of trouble. It's been first stolen by Napoleon, then took back, damaged during the Second World War, then damaged again during the first New Year's Eve through the fireworks when Germany was reunited. And now it's up there again, always beautiful. This is how the square looked like at the beginning of the 20th century. It was surrounded by classical buildings. There is also a painting that was made by the expressionist painter Ernest Ludwig Kirchner. And And this is a less nice picture. That was during the years of the Nazi. The picture on the left was actually a parade that was made on Hitler's birthday in 1939. Again, this is after, you're gonna see a lot of picture of how it looked after the Second World War, so you realize how much has been damaged. The whole square was completely destroyed. The Brandenburger Gate managed to be standing there, of course damaged, but survived. So this is what happened then. Because everything was basically rubble, they cleaned out all the space, and the Brandenburger Gate was standing in the middle of the death strip. The wall that you see on the right was the outer wall to West Berlin. And then from the inside, basically for 28 years, nobody could go through Brandenburger Gate. This is how you would see the gate, the closest you could come from the east side and from the west side. A lot of important historical moments happened in front of the Brandenburger Gate. One of the most famous is when US President Ronald Reagan made a speech in '87. And during this speech, he said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. The relationship between the two were improving already at the time. He said later that he didn't know for 1 year if he should have said that phrase, but at the end, he did it. And 2 years later, Gorbachev, on a speech in Berlin, made also a very important remark. He said, life doesn't forgive those who arrive too late. And a month later, the Berlin Wall fell. This is what happened, what I remember as a child. This is the fall of the Berlin Wall. Now, there is an interesting story how it happened, because it basically happened by mistake almost. There have been a lot of complaining in East Germany about the fact that, about the travel restriction. People wanted to go and visit their parents or everywhere outside, not just in the East Bloc. So there were a lot of demonstrations that led to a point where finally they decided to allow the citizen to move also to West Berlin. But on the night of the 8th of November, there was a press conference, and the member of the committee of the government of the GDR arrived very late, and he received a paper with just a draft of this new law. And he just read it out without really knowing what it was about. And an Italian journalist actually asked, so when is it possible that the people can travel again? And he just said, oh, for my knowledge, immediately. So a lot of people started gathering at the entrance of, at the different entrance of Berlin. And of course, the guards, they didn't know anything about it, just saw people coming, and they didn't want to shoot all these people. So eventually, after a couple of hours, they decided to open the gate, and something that was supposed to happen slowly in the time just happened overnight, and 20,000 people started going to West Berlin and the other way around as well. So this is how the Berlin Wall fell. Maybe somebody remembers this. This was New Year's Eve of the first reunited New Year's Eve in Berlin, with David Hasselhoff singing I've Been Looking for Freedom in front of the Brandenburger Gate with the most beautiful jacket I ever see, with the lights on. So again, we go to the square now. This is how it looked shortly before the Berlin Wall. So you remember how empty it was. And this is how it looks today. It's completely rebuilt. There are many embassy and offices in this area. This, for example, is the US Embassy. On the other side is the French one. Unfortunately, I forgot to put the arrow, I'm sorry. There is also the Russian and the British nearby, not in the square directly. Then there is the DZ Bank. I will show you in a second why I think it's an important building to know. Then there is the Academy of Arts, which is not the school, but is an association. And then there is the very famous Hotel Adelon. Now, this is the building I was talking about. It's just a bank, actually. The reason why this is so interesting, during the reconstruction of the square, there were a strict regulation about facade, about height, and Frank Gehry, if maybe somebody knows who is him, is a very wavy architect. He did the Guggenheim in Bilbao, the Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles, and so on. So he did this this building that is a kind of imploded gallery, because if you see outside, the facade is pretty plain. But this is a surprise where I always take the people when they come to Berlin. So if you go there, really you have to have a look and just go inside, because inside you have the surprise. And the surprise is this huge, weird structure, which is called the Whale. They do events there. There are offices, there are people living there, and it's completely free to see. So why not? Next to it is the Academy of Arts. As I was telling you, was an association for the arts. It was founded in 1696. There were a lot of important members like Goethe or Max Liebermann or Bertolt Brecht, for example. This is how it looks today. So it was the only building that was not completely destroyed. Just the internal part of the Academy of Arts survived. So what they did, they built a glass shell around it to protect the original building. And it's a very interesting building to see. There are a lot of exhibitions there. This was also the office during the Third Reich, the office of construction, where Albert Speer, which was Hitler architect, projected this incredible capital of the world, Germania. This was the model. This is how Berlin should have looked like if they made it. They didn't make it because of the war, and basically they would have probably never make it because the Berlin soil is too mushy to have that weight. So we pass further to the Adlon Hotel. The Adlon Hotel was the dream of this man called Lorenz Adlon, which was a big friend of the emperor, and convinced him that Berlin needed a hotel that was at the same level of the Waldorf Astoria in New York and the Ritz in Paris. So this is how the Hotel Adlon was born. And unfortunately, during the Second World War was burned. It could have been saved, but then again, the Soviet soldiers decided to have a party inside there, and they got drunk and they set it on fire. So it was to be tear down after that. They reconstructed in 1997 as close as possible to the original, and it is the hotel where the most important guests who comes to Berlin have been. Some of the most famous are, for example, Charlie Chaplin, Einstein, Marlene Dietrich, Josephine Baker. President Obama has been there, and is not the only one. Basically, all the presidents of all the states that come on official visit in Berlin stay at the Adlon. Then my personal favorite, Queen Elizabeth. I'm a huge fan of this lady. Look her face, she's just too nice. And then it's also the famous hotel where these things happen. It was when Michael Jackson almost dropped his baby outside the window. So we go now further. We will stroll under this Unter den Linden. Unter den Linden, which means literally under the linden trees, was a path that was laid down in the 16th century to connect the royal palace to the hunting ground of Tiergarten. In the 19th century was expanded and became this beautiful avenue with this linden tree. The linden tree that you see today are not the original one. They of course burned down during the Second World War, so they were replanted in the 50s. Unfortunately, these days you don't see that well the street because it's full of construction work. They are building the subway. Hopefully for the time we all can travel again, you will be able to see the full splendor of this street. And we arrived to Bebelplatz, also known as the former Opera House. So this square is very interesting. The name today comes from August Bebel, which was a leading figure in the social democratic movement, and it was renamed like this in 1947. This square was just adjacent to the Royal Palace and became basically the forum of arts and culture to the will of King Friedrich the Great. He wanted to create this forum, and so he made this square. It's where you can have really the feeling of how Berlin looked like in the 18th century, in the mid 18th century, more or less. Unfortunately, also famous for the book burning that happened in 1933, where the National Socialist Student Association took for the nearby library 20,000 books from authors that did not apply, let's say, to the ideals of Nazism. For example, books of Karl Marx or Einstein or Heinrich Heine, and they burned them. There is today at the same place the Sunken Library Memorial, which is this tiny window. When you go there from the street, you sit down and there is this huge library completely empty that have the space for 20,000 books. And nearby there is this writing on the floor, which was made by Heinrich Heine, and it sounds like a prophecy because he wrote that in 1821, and it says that was only a prelude. Where they burn books, they will also in the end burn people. So this is really, this has been really prophetic. So going to the square, this is how the square kind of looked like, or the surrounded area. And there is the State Opera there, the St. Edwige Cathedral, the Old Royal Library, the Humboldt University, the Royal Guardhouse, and the German Historical Museum. I'm gonna go through all this just so you have an idea what we are looking at. This is the State Opera, former Court Opera House. The name of the architect is very, very long and very German, Georg Wenceslaus von Knobelsdorff. It was laid down at the same time of the square. On the right side, you see how much it was destroyed during the Second World War. It was at the time when it was built, it was the first freestanding and the biggest opera in Europe. There are many operas now in Berlin, but this is still the State Opera, Staatsoper. Sometime in summer, they also do online outside concerts. And this is how they tried to rebuild it in the 50s. So with the few money the East Berlin had. This is St. Edwige Cathedral. This church is very important. It's the most important Catholic church in a city that is historically Protestant. Was historically Protestant, now it's actually nothing at the moment. But it was Friedrich the Great who wanted to have this church to show to the Polish Christian minority in Berlin the tolerance, because he tried to have people from different parts to come to Berlin. And the name St. Edwige came from the patron of Silesia, which was a region in Poland that was conquered by Friedrich the Great. This church became a center of resistance during the Second World War. There was this priest called Bernhard Lichtenberg, who would every night pray for the Jews and would expose the concentration camps publicly until the point that he became a nuisance to the government, and he was eventually arrested and he died in Dachau in the concentration camp. This is how the church looked like after the Second World War. And how it's been rebuilt inside is totally modern. It's really pretty though. So even it doesn't matter which religion you are, it's still a nice building to visit. So the next one is the Old Royal Library, also called the Chest of Drawers, because it looks like a chest of drawers. It's been for the longest time the library, not today anymore. Today there is the Faculty of Law of the Humboldt University, whose main building is on the opposite side of the road. And when you cross the street, you will find finally the equestrian status of Friedrich the Great, also called the Old Fritz. This is how it looked like. And this is the Humboldt University, which was founded in 1810 by Wilhelm von Humboldt, which was a linguist, and with the help of his brother, Alexander von Humboldt. It's a very important university. I studied myself there for 1 year as an Erasmus student. I was studying history of art, and they have a very specific model of unifying teaching and researching. And this model has been taken by many other institutions around the world. One of them is the Johns Hopkins University, for example. Next to it is the Neue Wache, Royal Guardhouse. This was the masterpiece of the architect Karl Friedrich Schinkel, which was the most famous, the most beloved classicist architect in Berlin in those years. It's been the Royal Guardhouse really until the end of the monarchy in 1918. After that, it became a memorial. First was in the 30s, became a memorial for the victim of the First World War. during the time of the GDR, became a memorial of the victim of fascism and militarism. And then after unification, became a memorial to victim of wars and dictatorship, because both Nazism and communism have been dictatorship. Inside, you will find this beautiful sculpture of Käthe Kollwitz, which is mother and son, and it's placed under this oculum, which means it takes the snow, the rain, everything that comes from the sky, and it's made to show the sufferance of the civilians in times of war and dictatorship. Oh, sorry. And next to it is the Zeughaus, today German Historical Museum. It was the former Royal Arsenal. And this is the oldest building on the street. Of course, has been renovated after the war. And this is also the perfect example how old and contemporary architecture can live together in Berlin, because part of the building, there is an extra new building which was made by the architect Yao Ming Pei. The name might sound very Asian, is the one who did the Pyramid of Louvre. So it was a very famous one. And this building is also famous because in 1943 there was an attempt of assassination to Hitler outside, which didn't work. It's a beautiful museum where you can really see the German history. Yes. And then now we move to the next part, which is the Museum Island and the Humboldt Forum. The Museum Island is UNESCO World Heritage since 1999. It's a complex of 5 museums and an extra gallery that has just been added last year. And you can find a lot of things there. The Humboldt Forum is a new cultural center that's just been finished right now. It was supposed to open in 2 days. It's not gonna happen because of Corona. They're gonna open it first online and then later. But now we go one thing at a time. We start from the beginning of the Museum Island, which is the Lust Garden, pleasure garden. It was the former Royal Palace kitchen garden, and then it became a public park in 1646. During its history, it's been either a public park or a parade ground. So sometimes it was being filled with concrete. So this is, for example, how it looked like as a garden. And this is how it looked like during the time it was a parade ground and a rally ground. The story of this pleasure garden is connected with the story of this lady, the Electress Louise Henriette of Oranje-Nassau, which was Netherlands. She was the wife of the great elector Friedrich William. Of course, another one was called Friedrich William. She was a very sweet and a very kind person, and an incredible woman. She created the first orphanage and the first school for farmer girls. When she married, the marriage was forced, but it turned out to be a very loving marriage. She became a great advisor to her husband. And after she came to Berlin, her father gave her as a present some tulip bulb from Netherlands, a beautiful flower. And she made a plant into the pleasure garden. There were even guards there to check if this flower would bloom, but they never did because the weather in Berlin is not sometimes so friendly. But fortunately, she took something else that was also planted there, and it turned out to be the potatoes, which are now a huge part of the German cuisine. You will find them in different form or shape. For example, we have here the Kartoffelsalat, the potato salad. Then there are the Bratkartoffel and the Kartoffelpuffer are called. I don't know how to translate them in English. I just know the name of that in German. I don't think it's possible to translate that. But you will always find potato on the side of everything when you come to Germany. It took around 100 years to the people of Berlin to really fall in love with the potatoes, but eventually they did. The next building that we see still at the pleasure garden is the cathedral, the big cathedral. Now, this cathedral here was made in 1905 because the emperor wanted to have a cathedral that would have the same power of St. Peter in Rome and St. Paul in London. So they made this huge work. Before of that, there have been other churches that have been then destroyed. The first one was the parish church, which was made in 1465, and then this other one, and then this is the final church who was there until the Second World War. Again, very damaged, and then it's been renovated. Inside is very rich. It's the center for the Protestant. It's very rich. It's a beautiful church with a beautiful ceiling. You can also visit the dome. And downstairs, there is a crypt for the Hohenzollern family. So we move now to the real Museum Island. This Museum Island is this exceptional center of 5 museums and this gallery, the James Simon Gallery. It was all built between 1830 and 1930, so within 100 years. The first one was the Altes Museum, which is old museum. Then there was the Neues Museum, which is the new museum. Both of that, they have antiquities of Greek, Roman, and Egyptian. Then there was the Alte National Gallery, which has a big collection of painting and sculpture of the Classicism, Romanticism, and of the Impressionism. Then there is the Bode Museum, the one on top, which is dedicated to sculpture and numismatic. And then the most famous one, which is the Pergamon Museum, also for classic antiquities. The James Simon Gallery was added last year by the architect David Chipperfield, and it was an homage to this Jewish citizen who was a big patron for the arts. He helped to bring to the new museum this one, the bust of Nefertiti, which is beautiful. And it's also one of my favorite museums of all of the 5. Other famous work that you find there, these 3 are in the Pergamon Museum. The first one is, of course, the altar of Pergamon. It won't be visible until 2024 because it's under renovation, but if you go there, you're not gonna miss it anyway, because there are the beautiful Market Gate of Miletus and the Babylonian Ishtar door. And then we go on the other side of the street where there is the Humboldt Forum. Now, I have to be totally honest, I don't like it. And I can explain why. It's a reconstruction of the former Royal Palace. And we're gonna go to the Royal Palace in a second. So they rebuilt the Royal Palace exterior, because inside is totally modern, from 3 facades, but the 4th facade is completely blank. But it's gonna be a very important center for the art. It's gonna host the Ethnological Museum and the Museum of Asian Art, plus of course auditorium, center where people can go. It's gonna be an interesting place for culture in Berlin. As I told you before, it was the Royal Palace, looking exactly like the Royal Palace. This is the real Royal Palace. In the left is a photo, and on the right you have a model. It was built in 1443 for the first time, and it kept expanding until 1950. Of course, this is how it looked like again after the Second World War. It could have been saved. It was really possible to save it. The reason why they didn't, you have to remember, we were here in East Berlin. So there was a socialist communist party controlling the city. And first, they didn't have the money to rebuild it. And second, they didn't want to have a symbol of Prussian militarism in the city. So they decided to get rid of it. The area stood empty for 20 years, and then they built the Palace of Republic, the Palast der Republik in German, which is very contradictory. I loved this building, maybe because I saw it the first time I came in Berlin in 2005, was still there. It was basically the seat of the Socialist Unity Party, which was the only party in East Germany. But it was also a very interesting cultural center for the people of East Berlin. There were museums, there were cinema, theater, restaurant, events happening there. So it was a very focal part of the life of the people of East Berlin that didn't have the crazy wildlife that was existing in the West. They also had this very beautiful bronze window that would reflect. It was a very standard socialistic architecture, but it was kind of impressive. Inside was full of lamps. It was so full of lamps that they decided to call it, like the nickname was Erich Lampenladen. In German means the lamp shop of Erich. Erich was Erich Honecker, which was the head of state for most of the time until almost the end of the GDR. And when when the wall opened and the GDR collapsed, the artists took over and they started doing concerts and stuff like that. But they decided at the end to tear it down, this building, because again, it was a symbol of communism. So they didn't want to have it. And plus there was also a lot of asbestos inside. So they decided it was better to get rid of it. And they rebuilt the castle. So just to have you an idea of how it looked like in the former East Germany, this is the most representative picture I could show it to you. These cars are called the Trabant. Trabant means satellite or companion. It was a monopoly car and was produced between 1957 and 1990. Very ecologically unsustainable, but really sweet to see. There was a waiting list up to 13 years to get one of these cars. Today, you will see them around in Berlin. They organize the Trabi Safari. And there's also, you can find them as a souvenir in the souvenir shop, this little tiny car. So we go now to the last stop, which is Alexanderplatz. Now, Alexanderplatz has been a cattle market, has been a place where normal people were living, day laborers, and it was called Alexanderplatz in 1805 after the visit of the Tsar Alexander I from Russia in its honor. It's the biggest square in Berlin and I think also in Germany. If you see how wide is the space there, it doesn't even look like a square, to be totally honest, because it's completely blocked in half by the rail station. So there is a smaller square in the north side and the pedestrian area in the south side. This is how we look at the beginning of the 20th century. It was very lively. In the 20s, during the 20s, Alexanderplatz was the center of the nightlife and the daylife, everything. They were the first cabaret in Berlin was there. It was called the Überbretter. It was a very vital part of the city. There was this sculpture called Berolina, which was a representation of Berlin, which doesn't exist anymore. Again, Berlin is a city built on absence for many reasons. It was melted during the Second World War. Unfortunately, during the war was also heavily bombed and partly destroyed. So in the 60s, they started reconstructing in modernist socialist architecture, and it's how it is today. Even if they keep adding building, there is some rumors about making a skyscraper around. It keeps going and evolving this square. This is still the north part. These are some of the most famous buildings there. There is the Berolina House, which are just offices. Then there is the Urania World Clock, which is is a clock where you can see a lot of, like mostly the time of every place in the world. And then there is the Fountain of the International Friendship by Walter Womack. Now, this between the fountain and the clock, this is where most of the people meet for demonstration. On the 4th of November, 89, there was the peaceful revolution started there. And it's the same peaceful revolution that led to the opening of the Berlin Wall. Some months ago, there was a huge manifestation for Black Lives Matters. So it's a big place where people gather to demonstrate. This is, again, one of the pictures of the peaceful revolution. Then there is the House of Teacher, for example, and the House of Travel. Very typical socialist architecture. They are both under protection now. The House of Travel was kind of ironic because people could not really travel in that time. So I really don't know what they did with that at the end of the day. If you go to the southern part, there are two buildings that actually architecturally are completely different from the rest. And these are the St. Mary Church and the Red Town Hall. I just go quickly back because I also have to point of this yellow square that you see there. I'm gonna go there in a minute. So the St. Mary's Church is the second oldest church in Berlin. And the Red Town Hall is where the Mayor of Berlin works. Every year on November 11th at 11:11 in the morning, there is the official opening of the carnival season there. If you cross the street, you end up in Nikolaiviertel, the Nicholas Quarter. This is where the city of Berlin originally was born. Unfortunately, the area was completely destroyed and reconstructed in 1987. in this old style. So you go there and you have a little time travel in this old looking building. It's very nice. A lot of tourists go there, and it's definitely the best place to have real German food. And here's what you can eat and drink there. For example, the Eisbein, which is a boiled ham hook, the Königsberger Klopse, which are basically meatball with a white sauce and pepper, and of course the potato on the side. Then there is the currywurst. The currywurst is the Berlin most famous dish. It's the Berlin dish. It's basically sausages with French fries, and there is this ketchup, but there is the curry on top of it. The reason why there is curry is because after the Second World War, a huge black market developed. And there was this woman with a kiosk where she was selling these sausages, and she received from a British soldier some curry, because the British soldier had curry because they had the colonies in India. So she tried that on the sauce and she created the currywurst. Then there is the Berliner Pfannkuchen, which is like a donuts with marmalade inside, really good. And then the Berliner Weiss with syrup is something very fresh, but only if you are above 18, not under. Now we do the very last stop, which is the TV tower. I left it for last because the interesting story of this TV tower is that it was made in 1969, and it was supposed to show to West Germany the technological superiority of East Germany. So it was made up for that. It's very tall, it's 1198 feet tall, and you can go up with a lift in 40 seconds, and there is a huge panorama and a huge restaurant. You have an amazing view all over the city. Now, the history is very kind. So even if it started as a symbol of the superiority of East Germany, at the end it became a symbol of all Berlin. Like everywhere you go in the silhouette of Berlin, you will see the TV tower. This is, again, how it looks. And this is how it looked from outside. When you land on Berlin, you see it from everywhere. Sometimes it also pop up from the clouds. Sometimes it's taller than the cloud. And where the clouds are there, it's better not to go up because you're not gonna see anything. And now I want to end this tour with a sentence that I found about Berlin. And I think it's really fitting for this city, which is always evolving. And it's this one. If there is one thing you can count on in Berlin, it's changes. So from Berlin with love, thank you very much.
Thank you, actually, Silvia. I'm going to come back on now as well. And while we prepare for the Q&A session, I'm going to give you a minute to breathe.
Yes.
I just want to say to everybody, thank you for joining us. We're going to go into a question and answer session right now. So if you do have questions, please type them into the Q&A on the Zoom toolbar, and Silvia will start to go through them and we'll answer as many as we possibly can. And again, as you know, our tours are free to attend, but if you are willing to leave a tip for the tour director, it is most appreciated. I have given you several ways to tip. You could tip through Venmo, PayPal, credit card on our site, Girl Travel Tours, under the Tip the Tour Director. Or you can, if you do need to leave a personal check and you want to mail it to me, please text me or email me at marawalsh@gmail.com, and I'll give you the address for that. So I think I have taken a little bit of your time to be able to go into the Q&A. Silvia, do you see the Q&A now? Are you able to get into that?
I was starting going down. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can see and hear you just fine. I think our technical difficulties are well.
Yeah, I'm really sorry again, but in the end.
You know what? That's what happens when we're in the middle of a pandemic and everybody is online all the time. The bandwidth is getting really, really small. So we'll just take it from here and let's go through the Q&A. So if you don't mind, just read the question before you answer it so the audience has a context of what you're talking about.
Dear Silvia, may I ask you why you moved to Berlin from Rome? Because Rome and Berlin are my heaven on earth, and I still have dilemma where to move to live when the coronavirus will end. Wow, very good question. I love Rome with all my heart. Rome is my first home. and it's the most beautiful city in the world in the sense of beauty. But I moved here because beside of being tour director, I'm also an artist, and Berlin has got all the possibility that an artist can ask. Where would you move? They are both wonderful. To be totally honest, the language might be easier in Italy, but living in Germany is you have a higher life quality, to be totally honest with you. So I hope the help. You can write me if you need any information, for sure. Next one, how did KNUT die? Okay, that's a sad story. KNUT collapsed in the pool of the zoo where he was living because he had some heart problem. So he collapsed and died into this pool at a very young age. Let me go. Can you repeat at the end how the city was named Berlin? I wasn't on a tour 20 years ago and was told it was named after the little bears on the island of the spray. Berlin became Berlin. Kind of. The bear are not there anymore. So Berlin and Köln were the two settlements next to each other on the opposite side of the river. The word Berlin doesn't actually come from bear, but come from Berlo, which was the Slavish word for the swamp where the settlements were made. So I hope this answered the question. At some future point in time, are you planning to have a tour in Berlin Museum Island? I don't know. I don't know. Maybe. Let's see what happens. Even if there is so much inside the museum, and to be totally honest, I didn't even make to see them all because there are also plenty of more museums in Berlin. You have to imagine that Berlin was divided. So all the Museum Island was in the east side. So West Berlin had to rebuild their own museum area. So if you go to the west side of Berlin near Alexanderplatz, there is a full amount of other museums that had to balance the fact that they didn't have the museum in the west side like in the east. I went to Berlin before the fall of the wall. I would like to know how much I missed by not visiting the eastern side. I can answer a little bit to that. Basically, okay, I also arrived a long time after the end of the wall, but they've been renovated a lot in the last 10 years. So 10, 15 years ago, the east was still a little bit grayish and not like, it was very vital, but not looking that pretty. Now it looks very pretty, and sometimes it's even more expensive to live now in the east side than in the west side. And it's what I can say, just I had the fortune to talk with a lot of German citizens that are older and they lived through the fall of the wall, and I always ask where they were on the night the fall were. So I have a lot of stories about how they were, their impression going to the west or going to the east. Just to tell you one, my ex-boyfriend who was from East Berlin, he told me that the day that they crossed the gate and they went into West Berlin, the first things he did, he had a Coca-Cola. So you can imagine how different was life. So I tell you, come back and see East Berlin. You don't see that much of a difference now, but East Berlin is super alive. I live in East Berlin, even if it's not East anymore. Could you talk a little about Christmas market in Berlin? Where are the best one for next year, of course? Yes, because this year there are no Christmas market. There are plenty. My favorite one is outside the castle of Charlottenburg and Gendarmenmarkt. We haven't saw them in the tour because Berlin has got so many places outside the area that it was impossible to have them all. So this is my two favorites, Gendarmenmarkt and Castle of Charlottenburg for sure. Oh, thank you. Somebody texted the Turkish daughter saying that I'm very knowledgeable about Berlin. Thank you very much. Why was the man wearing two watches in the photo outside the Reichstag? The audio cut. Ah, okay. Now you're curious. So they had to kind of Photoshop their photo at the time, even if Photoshop was not existing, because he was not wearing them because of fashion or something. He stole them because the Russian soldier, yes, they liberated Berlin, but at the end of the day, they also made a lot of barbaric things like stealing and set places on fire because the Germans were the enemies. What is the name of the violin song that plays by the Sinti and Roma Memorial? It's called Mare Manushenge and means our people. And this is a very light undertone. You have to pay attention when you go there. It's not that loud. Can you explain again East-West Berlin and East-West Germany? I thought East Berlin was in East Germany and West Berlin was in West Germany. No, East and West Berlin. Berlin was a whole city. It was divided by the wall. So West Berlin was called West Berlin because it was in the western part. It was inside, as an island inside East Berlin. I hope. My mom came to Berlin 5 times. She still doesn't understand how we work the wall. So I know it's a difficult area there. What is the name of the man who exposed concentration camp St. Edwidge? It was Bernard Lichtenberg. How safe is travel in Berlin for Americans? Berlin is super safe. There are some maybe dodgier area outside the city center, but mostly the worst that can happen is that they steal your wallet in the public transportation. They became a little bit heavier on that in the last years, but it's generally a very safe city. I've been around day and nights on my own, and I've never been scared in 13 years. Curious, did Hitler interfere with the university? Yes, it did. During the time of Hitler, of course, they dismissed a lot of members of the university who were Jewish. And so it happened also for the member of the orchestra, for example. Why do you always refer to the Nazis as National Socialists? You never mention the word Nazi. Well, Nazi is just the shortened for National Socialist. Why do the 6 statues atop Humboldt University represent? I don't know, to be honest with you. Probably some famous person. Karl Marx studied there, for example. I know there is a poster inside the, what is the kitchen garden? Basically, it was the garden of the Royal Palace, where they would plant vegetables that were used for the Royal Palace. The potato dish looked like what Jewish and Americans call latkes, a popular dish this time of the year. Good to know. I will try when I come back to America, because it's where I also want to come back. What is the talking tower behind the cathedral? I think it was the TV tower, because it's just after the cathedral. Would like to visit the Berlin Zoo when I'm there. Where is located in relationship to the walk? It's not close. It's in the center of former West Berlin, around the area of Kudamm. One advice that I can give, if you want to basically see the city center in like the most important monument with less money, you just take the local bus number 100 that goes from Alexanderplatz to the Kurfürstendamm, where you also find the zoo. How is the public transportation? With so many people, traffic must be terrible. Not at all. Public transportation works pretty well. Not like the rest of Germany, because as I told you, Berlin is not Germany, it's less organized. So there is also a lot of works sometimes around, but no, the public transportation works very well. Yeah, traffic, I have a car and I don't struggle with traffic here, maybe because I'm used to Rome, which is way worse. Yeah, there are some time of the hours there are no, because most of people use public transportation and bikes, a lot of bikes here. As most of former East Berlin gone through redevelopment following opening the wall, yes, as much as the West. There was a lot of renovation, and a lot of new buildings that were built were once to the death strip. Okay. I visited, I'm reading by doing. I visited both East and West Berlin in the early 80s. I have 2 questions regarding the site I visited while there. In the west side, there was a modern looking church nicknamed Lipstick and Compact that was made from broken stained glass collected from churches around Germany after the war. Is still there. On the east side, I visited a history museum that painted a very different picture of World War II that depicted in the West. I also saw the lampshade that I will never forget. Is that museum still there, and did they preserve the depiction of history that it conveyed? If you came there in the 80s, probably, yeah. Probably the second question probably doesn't exist anymore, that history museum. They don't do propaganda now against anyone. The first one, I think you're referring to the so-called Gedächtnis Church. It's the Church of the Memory, which is a church that is kind of broken on top, and they reconstructed the new church as an octagon nearby in this beautiful glass space. I think you refer to that. Is it easy to move around in Berlin if you don't speak German? Do many Germans speak English? Yes, they do, and they love to speak English. At the beginning, I was very upset because I would try to speak German to people and they would reply to me in English. The older people, maybe they don't speak that much English, especially the people who grew up in former East Berlin, because they were supposed to study Russian at school and not English. What is your favorite food in Berlin? Oh my God, where to start? I like something called Holzfäller steak, which I hope you're not vegetarian. It's a steak, it's meat. I like everything. And there is also a lot of non-German food that is good to eat here. Can you talk about the Palace of Tears? I remember passing through as a teen when East was separated from the West. Went again 2 years ago, very emotional. The Palace of Tears was a little palace, a little building that was placed next to the train station of Friedrichstrasse. Friedrichstrasse was closed as a station because it was between East and West, and where the people could say goodbye to each other. That's why it's called the Palace of Tears, Tränenpalast in German. How many days should I plan for seeing Berlin? Great presentation, thank you. At least 4 if you want to run. At least 4. Yes. I want to ask more about how Bonn became capital city instead of Berlin in some time of the Germany history. So it was during the Cold War, during the division. East Germany kept the capital in Berlin, and West Germany, they decided that it was better to have it outside because Berlin was just an island into East Germany. They don't want to have any, not say connection, yeah, interference, let's say. And plus they couldn't use the parliament because the parliament was so close to the wall, they were scared that there could be some kind of spying. And so it was a political move. And Bonn is a very small city, it's a not so important city. They wanted kind of lay low, let's say, and have distance between the two sectors. The Holocaust memorial is block of different size. What is the significance? I don't know exactly the significance, but it's part of the idea of something that looks very structured, but actually is not. And this lack of structure brings to the collapse of this ideal or the collapse of the humanity. What is your opinion about what John Kennedy actually said? I'm a citizen of Berlin or I'm a jelly donuts. Okay, this is controversial. Grammatically was correct what it said. But the rest of Germany, not Berlin, called the Berliner Pfannkuchen. We call it Pfannkuchen in Berlin, but if you go everywhere in Germany, they call it Berliner. So the rest of Germany thought that it would say, I'm a jelly donuts, but actually say, I'm a Berliner. I had heard of the stone from the old royal palace were used for the gigantic Soviet cemetery and memorial outside the city. Is this correct? Is the Soviet cemetery still there? I'm not sure if they used it for that. I have to be totally honest, but yes, the Soviet cemetery in the Soviet monument is still there. It's outside in the Treptower Park, and it's an amazing monument. It's really big. How has East melted together now with West? The younger generation, the people who are now 20 that were born already after the end of the war, they don't see the difference. But for me, for example, I'm 39 and I have a lot of friends who grew up in former East or West Germany, and I can still see the difference of mentality, let's say. To make it very, very general, they say that people from West Germany are very polite but kind of fake, which is of course not true. It's a generalization, while the people from the East side, they are very honest but also very rude. This might be a little bit real sometimes, and I can see the difference way of being when I deal with older people, or also people of my age, actually. But now the younger generation, they don't see that difference anymore. Which museum on the museum island will be virtually accessible before physically? I have to be honest, I don't know. You should check on the website. Probably they have some online tour. Have the train track difference been resolved? They were different, gosh, between East and West. This is a very technical question that I don't know, but there are a lot of new trains. What is the cost of living in Berlin? I'm the lucky one. I'm the one who have a very old rental contract, so I still don't pay that much. But now, let's say, I don't know, about €8 per square meter. Depends on the area. You could find a two-room apartment for 800 euro more or less. They just made a law though very recently of rental control, because the price in the last year started spiraling and people started complaining because still in Berlin there is this thing that you don't get paid that much while the price kept increasing. So that's why they did this this law. Where did the art came from to fill all the museum? Wasn't most of it bombed? No, of course, during the war, they kind of saved in different places. They took it into safety. I know you mentioned you will be in COVID shutdown again starting tomorrow. Tomorrow. How is Berlin under COVID, and how are your local business economy doing? Is there travel between other European countries, or are Germany border closed? So economy, it's been horrible. I want to cry. There is a total lockdown. Everything's gonna be shut. Like only supermarket and very essential things are gonna be open. Is it possible to travel for reason that are like visiting family? You have to prove you have a negative test and you have to go in quarantine. So it's very annoying. That's why I'm not going even to see my family on Christmas time, because I would have to do 10 days quarantine and then 10 days back here. But they really recommend not to travel at the moment. We hope it's gonna go better. What happened to Kaiser Wilhelm Gedächtniskirche? Is this still there? Very dramatic memory from 67 when I visited. Also remember Pergamon Museum, so many Rembrandts. I think you saw the Rembrandts in the old National Gallery. The Kaiser Wilhelm Gedächtniskirche is still there, is the one I was speaking before, that it's broken on top. They decided to leave it as a ruin and they built next to it this new church that is very modern. What is the best time of the year to visit Berlin? Because it's very cold here in winter, I would say better from April, May until September, October is going to be the best time. But of course, if you want to see the Christmas market, then you have to come in winter. The first time I came in Berlin, before I moved here, I came in December. I was frozen, but happy as a child. Do you usually take tourists to the Berlin Wall to see the amazing artwork there? I actually live nearby that wall, the East Side Gallery. Yes, I take tourists there. I take friends there. There is also other part of the wall that you can visit though, where there is no art, but you see how the section was made. It's another part of the city near Bernauer Straße. Are you living in the East or the West? In East Berlin, in Friedrichshain. How did Germany afford to rebuild with such enormous destruction? Good question. Let's say that Germany has been supported by the European Union after the Second World War. So they made it to regain strength. The problem was mostly in East Germany. They were not the rich, and when the wall fell, there's been this huge gap between people coming from the East Side that lost their job, they were not rehired in the West, or they were paid less. So that's why there is a huge amount still of unemployment in Berlin. But Germany in general got supported a lot by the European Union at the time and rebuilt itself. We were there 2 years after the fall of the wall to visit in-laws in the GDR. We spent some time in the West, but think we need to visit again. Do you do day city tour? It seems we may need one. Call me. I'm there. I can be there for you. If you only had 1 day in Berlin, what site would you see? Probably the things I show you today. So you have really a general idea. Would you consider Berlin a great place to raise children? Yes, there are a lot of parks, a lot of nature around, and the city, as I told you, is pretty safe. As I said in the chat, the Germans had to hide in the forest when the Russians liberated Berlin. They shot anyone they saw. My family is from East Germany. Yeah, very likely, because the Germans were considered the enemies. What is the name of the movie you recommended we see? Wings of Desire by Wim Wenders, which is a very famous German director. Why did the government manage to place the memorial of murdered Jews in downtown in a big area? Oh, you know why? In such a big area? Because that area was the death stripe. It was completely empty. So they could build there. They didn't have to tear down any building for that. What type of artist are you? I'm a figurative painter. I do portraits. The Holocaust Memorial was under construction on my first visit to Berlin, and I couldn't understand how it would work. But when I saw it completely, it actually does. It's very, very moving, somber, but also respectful. Lovely place to wander and remember. Yes, it's true. Unfortunately, and this is not a nice thing, a lot of young people that they really didn't know the history started making happy selfies around, like jumping on the stones and doing some kind of funny video to put on Instagram. And there was an artist, I think from Israel, who created a page which is called Holocaust. You can go and watch it if you are adults enough, because it's very heavy. Basically, you put the photos of the young people and you replace it through Photoshop into the concentration camp with all the destruction of the concentration camp to make them realize that it was not respectful what they would do. What is the art scene like and where are galleries concentrated? The art scene is very lively. There is a lot of galleries, around 600 in Berlin. The most famous are in 3 different parts. One is the Auguststrasse. I had an exhibition there this summer. Then there is the area of Potsdamer Strasse and Charlottenburg. These are the bigger gallery, but you will find art space and art galleries everywhere. What do you think about Checkpoint Charlie? It's a reconstruction. It's interesting to see because it's where it was. And if you want to have a nice photos with the fake soldier, it's definitely a touristic thing to see. It's interesting because it was really there, but the structure is a reconstruction. And there is a museum nearby, which is also very interesting. How is Berlin managing integrating the large number of migrants and refugees coming to Germany? Very good. I think last year only 1 million of refugees came. Angela Merkel said we can do it, and it works. There are different centers that help them. They also made there are some guided tours in Berlin that are made by the refugees to help them. So it's actually working everything fine. There is not a big problem here. Approximately how many attended the Black Lives Matter demonstration? Who organized it? I don't know, probably through internet. I think there were at least 150,000 people, at least, in the square. And it was during like kind of lockdown, so everybody with a mask. But it was very, very big. Are the museum wheelchair and handicap accessible? I don't want to be 100% sure, but I think most of them are. So every time you go, it's better to check. What I know that is not accessible for wheelchair is the TV tower, unfortunately. It was built way too early when there was not this kind of sensibility, unfortunately. Okay, you live in Winnipeg. How cold does Berlin get in winter? I want to come and visit where there is the least amount of tourists. I know that I'm very bad with Fahrenheit degrees, so I'm trying to count it. Let's say we say around 0 degrees Celsius here. So I think it's 42, Mara, 36 degree. Sometimes get even lower. I think 5 years ago or 6 years ago, we had the coldest winter in 30 years, and literally for 4 months was -10, -20. So 26, 16 degree Fahrenheit, the winter was very heavy. Now it's getting a little bit better. The Karavan food hall is one of my favorite places. Do you take tours up there? I do not personally, but yeah, I agree. It's an amazing place to go. And if people have free time, they should definitely visit it. We flew into a small airport when we visited Berlin about 4 or 5 years ago. It's rather awkward. It's still the main airport. It's called Tegel. They just closed it a few months ago. They opened a new one after many, many years of working. Yeah.
So Silvia, I think we're coming to the end of our Q&A, and you made it all the way through. So congratulations for that.
Thank you for the patience, and sorry again for the technical problem.
There's no apologies needed. You were awesome. Your information was incredibly interesting. I think a lot of us who don't know a whole lot about Berlin other than what we learned in history books are very intrigued to visit now. And those that have been, obviously, you have reignited their heartstrings to return. So I really appreciate that.
I really hope.
Thank you.
I really hope, because Berlin is really a city that must be discovered. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I really enjoyed it.
That's awesome. Thank you. And everybody out there, please, if you have it in you, please leave a tip. As we all know, Silvia could do this tour on the ground without thinking about it, probably, if she was walking us all around, but it does take time and research to put it all together in a presentation format. But I know from Silvia and many of our other tour directors how it really does bring life back to their purpose of living as well during this lockdown. So thank you everybody for coming. These tours would be nothing without you, and we appreciate the audience. And I just want to say have a good evening, morning, or afternoon, wherever you are in the world. And we will see you again next week.
Thank you very much.
All right, take care.